It's bigger than biotech.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of It's Bigger Than Biotech. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Rohit Shukla, who is the founder and the CEO of LARTA. So, just to start us off, the first question I wanted to ask you, Mr. Rohit, is what is LARTA and what exactly do you do for your role there?
Yeah, so I founded LARTA a long time ago, 32 years ago. It's now called LARTA Institute. It used to be known as the Los Angeles Regional Technology Alliance, and it's always been associated with entrepreneurs in the sciences, across the sciences. But we got extremely involved with NIH and four in establishing their first commercialization program for all of the technologies that they funded under phase two of the SBIR program, which is a very large program, as you may know, in NIH. And certainly this ranged across all of their funded projects. So for 18 years, we were involved with entrepreneurs in biosciences. But we also, along the way, became an innovation hub for a whole range of other technologies that may or may not intersect with biotech, including materials and food and energy and water, in particular like agricultural biotechnology, marine biotechnology, etc. So it was always biotech had some relationship with the stuff that we worked on, but otherwise they were their own domains, right? LARTA has continued that role, and now we've actually established two programs locally, which I designed and we are managing, called Heal.LA and the Venture Fellows. And Heal is specific to biosciences companies, startups, and otherwise, who are involved with either identifying or developing an innovation for that would serve underserved communities in particular, partly because the sciences here, which are wonderful, rarely get an opportunity to demonstrate what they can do in active terms for communities, and in particular underserved communities. Served community, you have access to a lot more in terms of innovations, whether it's at Cedars or at SC or at UCLA. You've got access to those. For underserved populations in particular, which are a fair number in this county and in the city, you have to be able to sort of connect what is going on in the lab or work with companies that are actually developing solutions to that. For example, this is to give you an example of what LARTA has done. And by the way, so far as my role is concerned, I cut across everything, including operating the company itself and also developing the strategy and helping to work with companies and putting out the messaging and everything, right? So that's how engaged I am. That's a sort of typical entrepreneurial zeal, cut across everything. So we're an innovation hub for the development of solutions that can be trialed out in communities across the country, and in particular in Los Angeles County, because we've got a program here called HEAL, which now has an impact fund starting that's going to fund these projects, with the first funder being the state of California for the fund itself. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's amazing mission that LARTA's on, especially with Heal LA. And something that stuck out to me is you founded LARTA over 30 years ago, approximately 33. So, what problem were you trying to solve back then, and what problem are you solving today? Has that changed?
A very good question, Riday, but I will tell you, I mean, I wish I had told you that this was kind of an all-encompassing strategy that I had thought about in the beginning, right? It was extremely responsive, that much I'll tell you. At the time, California was going through a pretty bad period. The aerospace and defense industry, which was a pillar of this establishment. Remember, we didn't have a lot of biotech at the time. We had research in a number of areas, of course, and we had great hospitals, and they still are. But at the time, in terms of the broader category of jobs and economic growth, the aerospace and defense industry was prime, as was entertainment. Those were the twin pillars of this economy, and aerospace and defense died pretty quickly in California. At the time, 400,000 jobs in LA alone, LA County and its region, and the LA region, were lost in 1 year. Whole middle class communities were hollowed out. But there was still this entrepreneurial zeal. And I went to the state and I said, look, you've got to be able to work with entrepreneurs that are going to be part of a new economic future for LA. And they did. They founded these three what they call regional technology alliances. That's why RTA. That's why
Okay.
LA RTA. And told us to be able to work with them in developing entrepreneurial companies in the LA region and in two other regions. So we did that. We worked with them. We had a fund that we actually provided monies for commercialization to companies here that were starting that already had a federal award. So it was a match program. Okay. We did that for 10 years, as the legislation suggested. And then we said, you know what? This commercialization emphasis is extremely important in getting science out of the lab. So we went to the federal government to start working with them. And the first group that we worked with was NIH. And for 18 years, we worked with NIH on their commercialization program. And it was extremely well thought out. It was extremely well received throughout the country before it sunsetted. And then they went off to do their own thing internally as well. So it gave us a tremendous network. It gave us a tremendous head of steam in terms of how to be able to tackle or deal with commercialization challenges for biotech startups, and to also work with industry and to work within an ecosystem and establish that ecosystem. So it took us that length of time, but along the way, as I said to you earlier, NIH was our foundation, was our rock, on which we then went to NSF, we went to USDA, we went to DOE, all these big agencies, and we had contracts with them to help their grantees commercialize their technologies. So out of 1,000 companies that we've worked with, some 1,500 are bioscience specific, and the rest are cut across the entire rest of the group. So it's a major part of our work. We are now focused on building and growing a thriving ecosystem in Los Angeles because we believe it is an extraordinary lab for the world in terms of its diversity. You know this very well, Renee. In terms of its diversity, in terms of its gene pool, basically, right? So it's going to be quite an endeavor that we're embarked on. So initially responsive, and then grew into this kind of role as being a commercialization catalyst. And then later, we became very involved in growing ecosystems around biotech and other industries, with biotech being a principal driver here for this conversation and for this space.
Absolutely. LARTA plays a very pivotal role in the ecosystem at LA and in California as well. It's a very important establishment. And just to dig in a little deeper, for someone who may not know what commercialization in the industry or SBIR might specifically mean, what are these things and why do they matter so much?
Yeah, so the federal government established SBIR some 50 years ago. Or a little less than that. Basically, it was the opportunity to be able to establish a conduit for technologies that were being researched and funded by federal monies, which is taxpayer money, into products and services that could really show the promise and the commitment that science had to product development and to better people's lives. Commercialization is the art of mining your assets, research, human, and other, to be able to derive products and services from a scientific endeavor. So far as we're concerned, this commercialization is a much bigger topic, obviously, but for this purpose, that's what we're doing, is to help companies mine their assets, develop their relationships, develop a pathway to money and investment, and develop an opportunity to grow their companies within the industry that they're in, but also to look at adjacent markets and not just to be completely unifocused, just because otherwise, if you didn't see the promise of what you did, you wouldn't have the crossover stuff that happens in industry all the time, right? So, yeah, those are the kind of things that we do.
Okay.
And it's a program set up by the federal government, SBIR, program set up by the federal government. Each agency has a set aside of a percentage of their research funding that has to be set aside for small business and for this program called SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, There are 3 phases. The first 2 phases are funded. The first phase is concept development. The second phase is pre-commercial product development, pre-commercial and market development. And then the third phase is not funded by the government. At that point, you have to be able to go and get your own things in place, but you can sell to the government
Oh, okay.
without having to compete.
Okay.
So they can do a sole source with you,
And so in terms of SBIRs, how is SBIR different from maybe venture capital funding? And
SBIR is what is
how competitive is this?
Yeah, so SBIR is what they call non-dilutive funding, because the government doesn't take shares, stock, a position in your company, none of that. Okay, it's all yours. Government has the right to be able to use your technology royalty free for its own use in perpetuity. But it is not an investment, right? But venture capital or other kinds of private investment capital really, to some extent, depend on your ability to de-risk your technology, right? And the SBIR grant can enable you to de-risk the technical risk in your technology. That is our emphasis, is we want to make sure that you de-risk it enough so that you have a product that you can take to an investor or to another company, a bigger company, right? So it's different in that sense, because in the case of venture or other investment capital, they will require a share of your business, right? They need to, so that they can share in the upside.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sounds like a very interesting program and a very helpful one at that.
Yes.
To breed innovation in an ecosystem. But one question I had for someone curious, like let's say someone had a company and they wanted to apply for a SBIR grant.
Yeah.
What are the things they must have in order to apply for this grant, and where would they start?
So you have to be a for-profit company established as such. You have to be able to go through certain government portals, most importantly SAM, which is a portal by the federal government to make sure that you are a business in good standing and that can actually do business with the government. And you have to have your SAM registration. Once you have those, if you're a raw startup, you have to be able to look around to see which agency you want to be in. NSF also funds biotech, as you know. NIH does as well, and the Department of Defense does as well. So there's plenty of opportunities, unless your technology is biospecific, in which case you would want to go to NSF. If it is not biospecific, meaning it has potential opportunities in other industries, then by all means you need to be able to look for those as well. So your research is very important, right? You have to research which agency you want to go to. Then you've got to go and look at what the agencies have had by way of topic areas that they put out for SBIRs, depending in the case of NIH on the institute, right? Because they've got 12 institutes at NIH or 11, and each institute has its own mission, and they may have a topic area that is suitable to them, right?
Mhm.
So you need to look for those, and they have a solicitation out every so often. So NIH has it twice a year, when you actually put in a proposal for a phase 1, which is quite technical. There is a format that you have to be able to follow in terms of the commercialization plan, because you have to have one from the very beginning.
Right.
And we help companies go through that process of actually developing a commercialization plan. Now, if you get the SBIR phase 1, you're also given an additional $6,500 spend on putting that commercialization plan into effect, the one that you submitted. And that's where we play a pivotal role, because we become a commercialization partner with you and would be compensated with that $6,500, which will enable you to write a commercialization plan and a proposal for your phase 2, which is a lot more money. Phase 1 is $100,000 or $120,000 now, or up to 200. Phase 2 is up to $1 million, with all the phases: phase 2A, B, C,
Mhm.
2 and A and B. and then you can go branch out into other things. For example, specific kinds of projects that different institutes run at NIH, and get even more money than that. And then you've got FDA programs and so on if you're doing a drug, or even if you're doing a device. So it is a very, very useful tool and driver for companies that are beginning that process. But you have to have something, because the competition is quite strong. You asked that question. There's a lot of competition for it.
Yeah.
For sure. And, it just depends on the budget. It just depends on the budget of the agencies and the institutes. It just depends on what they're looking for in any particular year that they think are important topics. They also develop, NIH does, what they call study groups that actually review these proposals along with the program manager. So it's a very involved process. And it's one that I don't think some investors really understand well enough to recognize the importance of these to breakthrough technologies, right? This is why the
Absolutely.
universities had such a strong position on SBIR.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems like a very powerful tool and a lot of funding as well, upwards of $1 million in later phases.
Yeah.
But one question I had was, if you do get a phase one, is it a guaranteed phase two as well?
No,
Is it
you
okay?
have to apply again. So
Wow.
the thing with a phase one is it's a 6-month program generally, and you've got a technical plan that you've got to be able to accomplish in that period of time. It's a concept development, essentially concept, to be able to validate your concept, right? If you haven't, it doesn't mean that you will be disqualified from getting a phase two. No, as long as you can say, this is why it didn't work and what we're going to do differently to be able to modify our way of working. But regardless, even if you do accomplish it, even if you do accomplish the plan, you still have to apply for a phase two. And that's quite a process, by the way. So you have a funnel, you have a lot of folks going in phase one to apply for a phase one. It gets winnowed down to a certain group within the phase one itself. And then it gets winnowed down further for the phase two. So you have less phase two companies than you have phase ones, obviously, because it's much more selective. So, and phase two, as I said, we sign companies up to be able to work with us on developing their phase two proposal, right? And if they succeed, then we become their partner for their commercialization work for the remainder of their journey through the phase two and beyond. And that carries $25,000 per company as per company per year, because that's 2 years for phase two. Phase one is 6 months. Phase two is 2 years, right? So, we end up working with companies that are applying for the NIH grant. They get it, and then they work with us for the commercialization through phase two and beyond.
Understood. Wow. Seems like a whole different world that school does not really teach you about the different sources of funding, and seems very interesting and intricate too.
Yeah, I wish they did. Yeah, I wish you would SC, right? You did have in the years past they have, because I know I've spoken to the class a few times. Well, Cal State LA does, because I speak there every year for one of their boot camps.
So I'd love to dig a deeper rabbit hole with you about SBIRs, but I was also curious about the other aspect of your career and going back actually to your education. Looking back, you studied social and political sciences and economics at Cambridge, and you also studied communication arts. So did those subjects impact your career as much as you expected when you were studying them? And do you think maybe doing another degree would have really impacted your direction? Or so how do you feel on subject selection as a matter of importance as a student?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I didn't go into this with the idea of having a career in a particular way. I was not sure at the age, honestly, to be honest. Unlike so many other folks in our country, they're all on a track and they go on a track and that's it. You become a doctor, you become an engineer, you become a businessman, whatever. You get an MBA, whatever. Right? So after Cambridge is very good because it doesn't pigeonhole you into a discipline, right? You can choose anything you want to in your tripos. There is a there is a tripos, what's called a tripos, where there's a kind of a broader subject area, and then you can keep narrowing it down and take classes. And by the way, the great thing about Cambridge is you can go to anyone's class. It doesn't matter if it's physics or math or natural sciences or engineering. You can just go to lectures, no problem at all. Okay. But I also did, which I really got very involved with at Cambridge, I really got into the philosophy of science,
Okay.
the scientific method, which researchers would know and take for granted. But this is just to study how this is done, right? What is the method about? The whole issue of scientific revolutions and paradigms. The first time I came across paradigm was from the guy who came up with the idea of paradigms, and that's Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the great book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and who lectured at Cambridge while I was there for a trimester, sorry. So I did meet him and a bunch of other folks like that. But after I finished at Cambridge, I went back to India and worked for the Tata Group.
Okay.
For a year and a half, it's longer than that, about a year and a half, as a management cadre person, selected from a pool of candidates that they do every year, and it's called the Tata Administrative Service, TAS. And you go on a rotation through Tata companies, and then you get selected by one or two of them to join their management ranks, right? I was not an MBA student, and I didn't have an interest in being an MBA student, and so I was the only one in that batch that did not have an engineering degree or an MBA, right? But I did a couple of really interesting projects on manpower development, business projections, market projections, new market introduction, marketing of a new concept, all of those things, right? It was very, very good. I enjoyed it. But then I came to the US to do communication arts and sciences, and that's specifically writing and filmmaking,
Okay.
which is my second master's. Just to show you that I did not have any in mind a specific career at all, but I did know that I was very good with people and that I was very good with creative people are starting or creating new things, right? And so I had a small practice of my own working with companies, working one-on-one with companies to try and stimulate their planning and their thinking about what they wanted to do and how they would tell the story of who they were and why they were doing what they were doing and what problem were they resolving. So that was already set in place at that time. Then when I joined a group called the President's Roundtable, which are CEOs of major companies and small companies together in electronics and defense electronics. And then when the downsizing started, that group was called upon by the state. And I became very involved with the state on how we might be able to go through the process and then develop a new kind of economy. And I'm so glad to say that the new economy is here. California has never been the same. And it's a great, great state, that has remarkable assets. For all its issues and problems, it is one of the most creative places on earth,
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely is. Absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And honestly, like your journey as a whole, I really thought it'd be more just one direction because you seem like from all that I've communicated like before with you, you seem like a very like you know what you want to do, you know what you want to say. But it's very grounding to see that you two had to kind of explore and feel your way around into what you actually wanted to do. And so my
Let
question,
me just tell you, if you don't explore and if you don't range across the possibilities that your spirit might be able to arouse in you, you know, I don't know that life is that meaningful if you don't do that, because you're not able to taste and flavor the variety of things that you need for any kind of endeavor, no matter what it is, whether you're a lab researcher or an artist, right? So I think it's important to explore. So I'm glad you recognize that, and thank you for saying that, because it is, in fact, a point of considerable interest to me to constantly explore, even in the work I'm doing right now.
absolutely.
And then there's people associated with it, because this is a game of people. It's not about ideas or
Right.
about things. It's about people, ultimately, right? So bringing people into you into your in association with you to then unleash their creativity and their ideas so you can absorb those as well in addition to your own ways of thinking about things is, I think, a very important part of making meaning in one's life. And so that's what I think is what we're called upon right now, right? At this time. It's a tough time, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
for science,
Yeah.
it's a tough time for anything, for many things. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Very insightful. And actually, I know you're a big proponent of your philosophy, like you just said, is curiosity and experiencing things. So, my question to you was, when do you know something is meant for you? And when do you know when to settle upon an opportunity versus when to reject one?
So, look, Hriday, the this is a constant issue. I'm not Hindu by belief or birth, but one of the greatest things that I've got is from Hinduism as a philosophy is the fact that it is really a constant search and struggle. It is never settled, right? So because it is never settled, and and I believe that because look at how science works. Just take science. So someone comes up with a proposition and works like crazy to try and defend and propose it and promote it within a particular scientific community. And there are people who are going to oppose it. So it's thesis, it's antithesis, and out of that consistent grinding between those two, you get synthesis. By the way, this mirrors entirely Hindu philosophy. I'm doing this as a religious person. I'm just telling you philosophy-wise, right? Because I did the philosophy of science and I'm very engaged in understanding that. So this whole consistent struggle is part of the issue with anything that you're doing. So my point in this is to simply say, nobody can tell you if an opportunity is good for you, given that there's this constant going on between thesis, antithesis, etc. If it hits you, it's because three things are happening, right? One is it appeals to you at a gut level, which you might also call in your heart. The second is that it appeals to you mentally because it is, in fact, it provokes kind of your need to be challenged, right? Because if you don't have a need to be challenged, you shouldn't be doing any of this. You should just become a bureaucrat, right? But if you're going to develop something and you're going to develop this, it doesn't matter whether it's a company or anything else, you have to be able to necessarily commit yourself to recognizing that you have to be aware of what's going on around you. And when something comes up that hits you in your heart and hits you in your head, third piece of that three-legged stool, and everything works in threes, by the way, as you know, even in Hinduism, right? Trimurti,
Mhm.
etc. Right? So the three faces of anything. The
Right.
third thing, though, is whether you can make if it's a business, whether you can make it work both economically and financially, but also in terms of a singular mission. And I mean by mission, I mean, what it is that you're trying to resolve. What is the outcome? What is the end result of what you're doing? That becomes your mission. That becomes your reason for doing, right?
Mhm.
And so I do think that there is this fundamental interplay between these three things is what will cause you to either gravitate towards something or to reject it. And you don't even have to spend a lot of time rejecting things unless you get very involved with something and then you start to see other things that that you think, oh my gosh, this is not for me. And that's okay because you will go through that process of regretting things that you've been associated with it, extricating yourself, getting involved in something else, extricating yourself from that. This is a constant. And people beat themselves up about that all the time. I think it's just part of what you have to do, because ultimately it's not about the institutions, it's about the people. If you can work with people at the level that you can actually gain some kind of meaning of the minds and the spirits, then I think you've got a great opportunity to go on. So hope I answered your question. It was a long way of answering.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really like your point about the thesis, the antithesis, and synthesis in a way. That's a really good philosophy. And I feel like I might just use it going forward.
Go back into your roots, Renee. My gosh, you got to read,
Absolutely. This sounds like a very interesting philosophy. But one thing that I want to ask you based on that philosophy is how did you find your thesis in that way? How do you know what thesis is for you specifically? How do
So
you
I didn't have a specific thesis except to know that I wanted to read as much as I possibly could. I wanted to write. I wanted to be as universal in what I read, and without necessarily becoming, because I did not want to be, and because I was not called to be, a specialist in any particular discipline. However, I will say that I was always attracted to life sciences from the time I was a kid because I come from a medical family. Most of my cousins are doctors or doing research on specific areas of investigation, whether it's orthopedics or cancer or psychiatry or neurologies. And I always used to go to the PDR, the physician's desk reference, which is one of the kind of fundamental books that medical practitioners use, and was in the operating theater from the time I was a very young boy. So I've been drawn to the life sciences and to medical issues in particular. And the fundamentals of medicine have a lot to do with all that biotech teaches us, right?
Mhm.
All that biotech teaches us. And like in regular scientific research, medical research is fundamentally where the rubber meets the road. You're dealing with patients, you're dealing with the outcome of specific kinds of mutations or other conditions to do with cellular structure and the way cells behave. And you're talking with whole systems, right? Vascular, cardiac, pulmonary. So, I mean, there's so much out there that for me to become a specialist in any particular area, even if I was drawn intensely to becoming a biotech scientist, which I'm not, but I do understand enough to meet that need in that particular innovation where it needs to be met and then take it forward from there. And we're very good at that. My organization's good at that. That drives me. So it's obviously going to inspire the rest of the company as well. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very interesting way. And were there any specific methods? Like, were there ever times where you just had to sit down and ask yourself, what is my purpose? What am I here to do in a way? Were there ever moments like that? And how did you navigate those moments?
yeah, in the beginning, especially, I mean, you have to have these moments all the time. If you don't have these moments all the time, then you're not necessarily paying attention to what's out there and what it has to offer, right? What the world has to offer, what people have to offer, what ideas have to offer, what systems have to offer, what the human spirit has to offer. So yes, I mean, it's there've been moments when I have failed at a particular thing, many moments. But again, it's the whole thesis antithesis thing. You've proposed something that you're committing to doing, and you fail at it because you're confronted by an antithesis, right? But out of those things that you questioned in what you did and understood in what you did not, comes a new way of being able to move forward. So at the moment of the thesis, you're thinking about this. At the moment of antithesis, you're also thinking about then doubting yourself. And then the synthesis gives you a new purpose to move forward. And that doesn't stop. So you tell me how many times you think I've been questioning myself all the time, right?
Right.
All the time. You never take it for granted. And I'm not just saying this as a big spiritual piece or something like that. Not at all. It's just, I think it's just very important to be able to not to work well in the confines of the limitations that we're working within, right? So, I mean, we've gone through lots. Last year, we had our worst year in a long time with all of the things that were cut back on the science programs in the federal government, right? Because of the DOGE cuts and otherwise. But like any other entrepreneurial business, we pivoted, and that pivot is still on.
Mhm.
So the antithesis has started,
Right. Yeah.
and the synthesis will follow. And we can already see that, that's going to happen, that we have to keep pushing, but it will happen, because we're
Yeah.
open to it.
No, that's a very beautiful example actually, because I feel like having a thesis and being confronted by an antithesis and then having synthesis out of that, what you synthesize becomes more resistant to the
Totally.
antithesis.
Totally.
I believe it's a very strong point you're making right now, and I cannot emphasize how important this one aspect is. But also, like, one thing I wanted to ask you, it's more of a hypothetical, let's say. Let's say you're 21 years old, right? No network, no specific background in commercialization, but you want to make as much impact as you are making right now in biotech, pharma, or healthcare. If you could focus on only one thing to reach the level you're at in terms of your career right now, your network right now, and your impact right now, what would that one thing be?
You know, it's very hard to be able to point to one specific thing that might have generated that trajectory, right? So I can't really give you one thing per se as if like it was a magic bullet or a particular path. But I will simply say that you have when you've got this notion that you want to do something, I would not necessarily take for granted that you don't have something, that you don't have a particular talent, without at least exploring to see whether you can conjure it out of yourself. And that's important because you're going to be talking to people about what you're doing. The first thing intellectually, mentally, that you need to do is to be able to say, what am I trying to do and who does it impact and how? What are the things that are currently out there that will so distract everybody when they think about me that they will not pay attention? Because you have to be able to communicate what you're doing. And if you can't communicate and there's 1,000 other people communicating on the same basis, you're going to have a problem getting through the signal noise because you're 21 years old and because you're just starting and you want to make an impact, right? So you've got to be able to think about a specific something in that broad opportunity set that really draws you. And you asked me that question before today about how do you know when when an opportunity hits you? Well, just trust your bloody instincts. Trust your thinking. Trust everything that you stand for. If you're a quote good person, which means you have values, which means you really are, curious but also considerate, passionate but also moderate in your in your ability to be able to bring people along. If you can do those things, and those are more fundamental than anything else, the rest of it becomes really tactical. The tactical is saying, like, okay, so what is the problem? Who else is feeling it? What are they currently doing to resolve the problem? What are the things that are being offered right now that supposedly address the problem? What are their shortcomings? Is there something that you can do to counter that? And it could be anything. It could be, better execution, cheaper, better performance that you can actually demonstrate. Because if you simply say it doesn't necessarily work. Intellectually, it doesn't work. You have to be able to demonstrate that this is true. That's part of being able to do battle with the antithesis, right? It's your thesis. You have to, but you've got to be aware that you can be confronted by evidence that refutes it, which is okay.
Right.
It's okay. You learn from that, right? But that's what you need to start doing as a 21-year-old, starting a new venture or a new thinking about what you want to do. What is the thing that really attracts you about this industry? Right? Is it just curiosity? Because that's not enough. Nothing wrong with curiosity-driven science. Fine. But if you're trying to build a venture, and I don't mean venture in the venture capital sense. I mean just a company to do something that makes sense. Even if you don't want to grow it to $100 million, everybody wants to. But if you don't, and you just want to keep it small and focused, still you've got the same issues to deal with. What am I trying to do? Who is it benefit? How do we know it benefits them? What are they currently using? And what is it about what they're currently using that I think I can do better? And there you have it.
I see. It's a very entrepreneurial way of looking at it. It really highlights your entrepreneurial sort of spirit and your journey. One thing I wanted to ask you though is, let's say I'm a student and maybe I don't want to do something entrepreneurial. My goal is maybe to go and work at a lab or do some groundbreaking research that could really revolutionize or create impact, or be a doctor and help and see
Super.
patients every day.
Super. I mean, those are my utterly favorite people anyway, Super. I mean, again, if you really want to make everybody wants to make a difference, right? At the end of the day, I think everybody wants to be doing things that are meaningful, right? In the broadest possible sense. So even if you're going to go into a lab, you still have the same questions to ask. Why are you doing this? Who is it going to benefit ultimately? What are the outcomes you're hoping to be able to find? You can't prejudge where science is going to go, where a particular piece of research is going to go. You don't know, but you have a good sense of this because you are steeped in the scientific method,
Right.
right? And the scientific method is really actually, I know this is controversial, but it's not really hugely different from the entrepreneur, right? Because you're always confronting, re-experimenting, reiterating, right? You're constantly doing that in your research. And you've got the discipline of understanding how you construct a possible validation or an experiment, right? Entrepreneurs can learn a lot from that, but they don't, only because they're on the seats, by the seat of their pants at the moment, just in time, and they have to be that way. You can't do that in science. It's true. So there's similar differences, obviously, between the two, between entrepreneurs and scientists. But at some point, they can come together, or at some point, a research scientist could very well become extremely important in his or her chosen field to an enterprise, right? So never say no, because at the end of the day, I would hope that we can get two kinds of scientists. One is curiosity driven. They're only going to be interested because they can research the hell out of anything. And I love that. It's curiosity driven. They continue to take it wherever they can go, down a rabbit hole if necessary. And then you've got the scientists who are working on pieces of research, or even big pieces of research, I mean, even large reams of things that go into research. At the end of the day, they're working towards developing a product or a service or something that could effectively make healthcare or diagnosis or treatment, if it's a doctor, more efficacious, more beneficial. And ultimately, my personal feeling is that science is a humanistic endeavor. It's to understand our world and to understand everything about our world is humanistic, because it allows you to be able to live within that world better, more elevated sense, shall we say, right? But you're always up looking for longevity, right? As a species. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the main goal. It's just longevity.
yeah, really. How old are
Absolutely.
you, by the way, today?
I am actually 22 as of now, so I have a long way to go before I'm worrying about longevity. But
Yeah.
still, we all have the Whoop bands, and we're all looking after our health. So I mean, it might not be so off after all. We're all trying to be younger, even though we're 22.
Yeah.
Interesting. But actually, perfect segue into my next question. Now with technology coming up with AI, the world is changing rapidly. So, as an expert in the ecosystem and within all these different industries, from all the experience you've had, where do you see real opportunity, and where do you think currently the hype in the industry lies?
So I do think, I do think that we've gone quite far in imagining what AI or artificially engineered or artificial intelligence can do. I'm not convinced that it can operate at a level that we expect it to do, because we don't expect very much, but we expect the whole world, right? Everything. Or when it's confronted by natural stupidity. So can you imagine natural stupidity and artificial intelligence? The combination is deadly, by the way, because you've got natural stupidity and then you've got an artificial intelligence that supposedly is going to be able to cure that stupidity? No. So it's a tool, right? It's a great, wonderful tool that could enable such extraordinary things from us, right? In research. I mean, look what they did. It was not AI driven entirely, but it was driven by a lot of collation with the development of the COVID-19 vaccine, right? Operation Warp Speed. It took 10 months, but look what they had to do in those 10 months. They had to bring the entire research complex that had been devoted to the study of these particular kinds of cells that attacked the human body. And they had SARS before that to be able to deal with, right? So they used SARS and the knowledge they had gained and the insights they had gained into Operation Warp Speed that then resulted in the COVID-19 vaccine. By the way, earlier in the 80s, this is what happened with AIDS as well.
Okay.
And AIDS research, same thing. I was working as a volunteer with Dr. Gottlieb, who was one of the original people who actually gave the name to the syndrome. He used to call it GERD, and this is UCLA.
Okay.
Gay God or GERD, I forget now. But so it's the same kind of thing. The knowledge that they were able to gain from immunology in chimpanzees and in other primates close to us gave them insights into how they could at least control the AIDS virus, which finally went down after. And that was much longer than COVID-19, right? It took
Right. Yeah.
15,
Much
12,
longer.
10 to 15 years. But anyway, so I'm not directly answering your question except to say, I do think that there is an opportunity here for us to recognize that we've got a ton of research all over the place that are stuck away in silos. Much of it's out, of course, but it becomes so siloized that one of the great things AI can do is to pull that out into measurable patterns that you can put forward, and work with and deal with developing new products and services and concepts and so on, right? It's remarkable for that purpose. It's also remarkable simply at being able to scour the landscape of our connected world, right, in terms of knowledge and information, because everybody publishes.
Right. Absolutely.
It's a truism that I think can drive a lot of the kind of drug discovery, any number of things in biotech, I think could be assisted greatly by AI.
I see.
Whether, this whole debate about it displacing things, there's going to be a lot of displacement, but so what? There's been a lot of displacement of all kinds of things before, and a reaccommodation of our skills and everything else, right? So I'm kind of mildly optimistic, while also recognizing that we should be putting guardrails around this. We should not be artificially engineering human beings.
Absolutely.
We should not. And we should not be doing, China's allowing it, but cloning, etc. Human beings I'm talking about. Right? They clone animals all the time, but we can clone an animal here. So anyway, I hope I've answered broadly your question.
Absolutely. I feel like AI application in the use of the science side of biotech is fairly common knowledge at this point. But where do you see AI being applied within commercialization? Because I feel like the science and commercialization is equally important. I mean, you can have a therapeutic that is the cure, but if you're not able to make it reach the right people at the right time, it has no value to the economy. So,
I
how do you
I think it can relieve a lot of the steps involved in being able to, in order to be able to have evidence basis to any kind of drug or therapy, right? It can do a lot in those areas. Just in the area of clinical trials alone, there's so much that goes into it, right? That AI can absolutely not just aid in, but also cut down the amount of time and the complexity that we have to go through ourselves. So in that sense, it's a huge boon to clinical researchers, to developers of new vaccines, to the study of new cell lines and the extraction of product and service from that. It's a huge boon to all these folks, right? As opposed to it being a threat. But it's also, I think, very, very helpful to entrepreneurs who need to be able to quickly identify possibilities in the patterns that surround us. People don't see patterns. They discover these patterns by interacting with all kinds of people. AI can cut through that very quickly for an entrepreneur, very quickly.
Right.
There's a whole science, of course, associated with querying. How do you do queries, right? How do you put out these queries to an AI agent? But I think, that's becoming also fairly clear and pedestrian. Now, everybody knows these things, how specific you have to get, how you have to interact with the agent. What are the large language models out there that can be used in, for example, working with diverse populations, for example, right? In order to try out a particular therapy. Problems that people have. For example, certain populations have a greater propensity for, have a less chance of having the marker for certain kinds of cancer. And I mean, biologists and cancer researchers would be delighted to be able to have a tool that enables them to develop a proxy faster for that biomarker. That's where it's going. And I think we should applaud and love it, for that purpose.
Right.
And not be taken by the hype that accompanies it, because there's a lot of hype, as we know. Yeah.
It's especially today with all media and everything, it's very easy to get lost in the hype
Totally
than
with it.
the reality of things as they are.
Yeah.
But yes, I really appreciate your honesty and thoughtfulness in your answer. And I believe it was very valuable for me at least, and also the people listening, to really look into your mind and see how you think about things, and also about the SBIR and the government funding system, which is somewhat of a mystery to a lot of us. And so thank you for giving us that insight. And thank you everyone for listening to the episode.